In this exciting episode, it's a regular potluck dinner up in Perry's office when the case is all through. Perry's client, Lieutenant Tragg, and even drop the ball king himself, Hamilton Berger, are sharing laughs with Perry, Della, and Paul. That's how you end a solid season of television. Let's see how we get there in Perry Mason, Season 2, Episode 30, The Case of the Lame Canary. Welcome to the Perry Pod. I'm your humble host, Jonathan Searcy, and my purpose here is pretty simple: provide an audio companion to the greatest legal drama in television history, Perry Mason. I plan to do a pod for every episode of the television series, and as time permits, I'll look at some of those made-for-TV movies too. I'll be working through the series in the order in which the episodes were aired. Each episode I'll give a brief refresher on the plot, and if the episode was based on a novel, I'll compare the book with its television adaptation. Next, I'll list some key pieces of trivia, as well as tackle the episode's main theme. We'll feature a Perry Proverb, a moment of wisdom from the man himself, and then we'll finish with a post-case water cooler, where just like Perry, Della, and Paul, we can rehash the ins and outs of their adventures. But first, to the law library! Each episode in the law library, we return to prior cases to refresh our memories about Perry's past so we can find fresh precedents for future cases. Quick question: what hours does the LA courtroom keep? I ask because in this episode we get a hallmark of the Perry Mason case, the noontime adjournment.
And before you call your next witness, and since it is nearing the noon hour, the court will adjourn until 2 o'clock.
The 2-hour break is the standard. Here's a montage of various judges from Season 2 giving us the same info.
I see it is the hour for the noon adjournment. The court will now take a recess until 2 o'clock.
Well, since it's almost 12 o'clock, perhaps this would be as good a time as any for the noon recess.
Well, gentlemen, since it's nearing noon hour, I think this is as good a time as any to recess. Court stands adjourned till 2 o'clock this afternoon.
Okay, so you break at noon, you come back at 2, but when does the day begin and end? If a case does not feature the noontime adjournment, it generally features the end of the day dismissal. Here's an example.
Since it is nearly 5 o'clock, the court will be adjourned until 10 o'clock tomorrow morning.
You can check this out. If there's an end of the day adjournment, the stopping time is 5 p.m. The next day starts at 10 a.m. 2 hours of court in the morning, 3 in the afternoon. The one exception: military court, which begins at...
Gentlemen, the hour is growing late. The court will adjourn until 0900 hours tomorrow morning.
Now, Perry uses this break to his advantage, although I gotta say 5 or 6 hours of court seems like a lot of time, considering we only get about 15 minutes of trial action per episode. Plus 3 hours in the afternoon. I hope Perry's grabbing some shut-eye during the break or laying off the heavy fare at lunch. That afternoon session can be a slog if you've carved it up. Tell me if you catch any of the courtroom audience members falling asleep. Now, let's get to the plot of this episode. The Case of the Lame Canary. Big shocker. The marriage between Ruth and Walter Prescott is on the rocks. Can we attribute their marital strife to the burdens of taking care of their canary? Maybe not. It seems like Walter's the one who's the schnook here, though he paradoxically exhibits that schnookness by insisting on the importance of marriage vows.
It's all I've got. All I own. I won't give it to you.
It's too bad. But remember what the man said. Till death do us part.
Well, Ruth leaves. Prescott signals a truck driver with his window shade. Then this happens. That's a truck crashing into a car and conspicuously coming close to squashing Ruth. Mr. Prescott gets mad at the truck driver. Ruth calls the man her husband suspects her of running off with Jimmy McLean.
I want you to get in a cab and come right over here.
Oh, that'll only make for more trouble.
Will you please do as I say?
Yes.
Good.
Well, Jimmy gets a gun ready, as one does, and Ruth shows up at Jimmy's apartment, discovers Jimmy's gone, and decides to go back to her house. You know what she finds? The dead body of her husband. She finds a gun and pockets it. She finds some letters and begins to burn them. And then another woman shows up. Uh-oh.
I found him like this. I just came in. Well, I did.
Mrs. Prescott, you don't have to convince me. You'd better try the police. Or haven't you called them yet?
The woman is Prescott's secretary and the same actress who portrayed Lois Fenton in The Case of the Fan Dancer's Horse. She's got a new do and everything. Margaret Swain, the name of said secretary, tells Prescott's business partner what's just happened.
Calling the Prescott home, I think you're wasting your time. There won't be any answer. If she has any sense, Ruth Prescott is at the airport waiting for the first plane out of the country.
Meanwhile, Ruth consults Perry, and they both go to see Jimmy.
Well, I figured she might need a couple of things, so I went upstairs to her room and I packed the bag.
Some people might think you were being presumptuous.
I don't care what anyone thinks.
That's fairly obvious.
When Paul and Perry rendezvous to talk with Johnson, the truck driver, we know the dude's lying through his teeth, spinning a yarn about a cut brake line and claiming that he didn't know Prescott, which we know is bogus.
I was trying to get the names of some of the witnesses. This guy came out and helped me with some first aid. Said he didn't see the accident but heard the crash. Yeah, Walter Prescott.
The plot continues to thicken when the man who was in the car that Johnson hit winds up dead at the bottom of a ravine. And it turns out the doctor at the hospital didn't care for this guy, even though the patient who he did care for used this dead man's name.
You treated him day before yesterday at your office for cuts and abrasions.
Not him, I didn't. Never saw him before.
So who are our suspects? Well, there's clean-cut liquor store working Jimmy McLean. But he's a man of conversation, not conflict.
I only wish I had seen him.
Why?
Because I just wanted to talk to him.
Then there's Ernest Ray, the deceased Prescott's business partner. He seems only capable of spouting corporate mottos, though, not of committing murder.
Yes, but as I said, our good name is our biggest asset.
Next up, Margaret Swain. She's got a double identity, and Perry calls her out on it.
I'm not talking about your Halsted Street apartment, which you rent for $80 a month. I'm talking about an apartment in the Westwood Arms, which you're leasing under the name of Maxine Sterrett for $350 a month.
Mr. Mason, I don't know where you got your information. But that is part of my private life. It has nothing to do with this case or your client.
Then Perry and Della run the old switcheroo on her apartment manager, and look what they find.
Get robbery detail. I want to know where each one of these furs came from.
But she's not guilty either. Nope. Though she does deploy a flurry of Fifth Amendment invocations, shades of the law library from our last episode.
I refuse to answer on the grounds that it may incriminate me.
That leaves our hard-living, truck-driving man, Harry Johnson. And Perry nails him to the wall.
Only after you killed Walden, you then double-crossed Prescott and killed him too. Yes or no, Mr. Johnson?
After the case, Ruth gets to ask the, "But how did you know?" question. And then Hamilton Berger shows up to contribute this groan-worthy witticism.
A little bird, huh? That's the first time I ever heard of a lame canary turning out to be a stool pigeon.
The 1937 novel on which the episode is based differs in a number of ways from its television adaptation. I have to say, the script writers sanded off all the most interesting rough around the edges features of the novel. So, yes, there's a dead Prescott. Yes, there's a wife who's seeing Jimmy. Yes, the partner in crime is the murderer. Yes, the routine with the monogrammed luggage goes down. But let's count the differences. For instance, that final detail about the monogrammed luggage. It's, frankly, better handled in the novel. In Gardner's novel, the secretary's alias is Diana Morgan, so the monogram is DM. So the monogrammed luggage, DM. And after the case is over, Perry actually proposes to Della because Della Mason. Obviously, the show writers didn't want to go down that route, but instead we got MS for Miss Street. And this is even more indefensible to me because Margaret Swain in the book is not Prescott's secretary, but is, wait for it, the name of the sister of the defendant. Yep, Rita Swain is the defendant in the book. Her sister Margaret tries to help her through her split with her husband. Also, we've got a larger part for the canary in the plot of the novel. It's the part of the case that's really mysterious that gets Perry interested. The lame canary's claw comes from the fact that someone clipped it too much. No stool pigeon jokes allowed. Now, the canary is a total MacGuffin. It's something that gets us into the case but doesn't play a huge part in helping Perry solve the crime. Still, the canary is better than being a weak excuse for a burger one-liner. In The Guilty Party, Jackson Wayman, he's named Harry Johnson in the television episode, handles his business way differently. He tries a fake out with a bandaged face in order to avoid the doctor recognizing him as the fake insurance inspector. Apparently, the writers thought that was too much trouble, and they just had Prescott be the fake patient. And then finally, the entire novel is framed with Perry wanting to get away from it all by taking a long cruise with Della. And the final scene involves the pair actually getting on a ship and Della turning down a marriage proposal from Perry, which is a whole lot of fun. And I gotta say, better than a corny joke by Berger. Advantage, novel. Now, let's get trivial, shall we? Each episode in our trivia section, I give you 3 takeaways. A Paul is the subject worth investigating more. Adela is something about a particular actor or actress in the episode. And a Perry is something we learn about our intrepid hero. Our Paul for this episode involves the police method whereby Jimmy's charred letters get reconstituted and used in court against Ruth.
Think the crime lab can do anything with it?
We can try. Williams.
Our Paul prompt. How exactly does this work? I don't doubt this is real forensic crime technology at work here, but I'm a bit befuddled as to how the technology actually works. See what you can find. Side note, is the contemporary equivalent of this forensic technology the way in which cops would manage to restore a deleted email from a laptop, say? When I write my updated for 2021 episode of The Case of the Lame Canary, I'll be sure to include that detail. Our Della for this episode concerns our favorite liquor store employee, Biff Elliot, a.k.a. Jimmy McLean.
Tell me, Mr. McLean, just what do you do for a living?
I work in a liquor store.
That's right, Biff. As you may have guessed, Biff is not Biff's real name. Neither is Elliot, for that matter. He was born Leon Shalek in Massachusetts in 1918. His ancestors were Jewish immigrants from Eastern Europe. He began using the nickname Biff when he got into amateur Golden Glove boxing. His mother learned of his fighting and canceled his future bouts. He served in the army during World War II, spending time in North Africa and Italy in the 34th Infantry Division. After the armistice, Biff put in 6 months on occupation duty and then came home. He completed a journalism degree at the University of Maine, where he wrote a column for the university paper called Scotch and Soda. I located a 1948 copy of the paper. It featured a Biff Shallock byline, a Scotch and Soda column. The topic, how the university was choosing to commemorate Armistice Day. Instead of declaring a student holiday or having a remembrance of some sort in November, the school decided to have May's Memorial Day carry the weight of those remembrances and be a chance to sort of talk about Armistice, VA Day, VJ Day, all together in May. And Biff wasn't having it. So here's what he writes in the column's penultimate paragraph. Quote, "So what if we don't blow bugles, thrill to the sound of martial music and all that hoopla? One of the most impressive things that could be done would be to take a minute, 1 minute, to be thankful, to be humble, and to meditate on ways and means of keeping this world safe from the atomic sword of fear that dangles by a Security Council hair above our heads. Think it over, committee, and see what you can do next year." Good stuff. Elliot moved to New York with his first wife, Betty, who is a model that he met in college, with the intention of becoming a writer. But after that didn't pan out, Elliot switched to acting, now with the name Biff Elliot, not Biff Shallock. He attended the Actors Studio and was in a small acting group with Jack Lemmon, with whom Elliot remained friends for the next 40 years. He was doing small parts for television when a Hollywood producer, Victor Seville, spotted him in a show and brought him out to LA to audition for the role of Mike Hammer in an adaptation of Mickey Spillane's novel, I, the Jury. Elliot apparently read every Hammer novel he could get his hands on, crammed for the audition, and nailed the 15-minute screen test. He was the first of several actors to appear as Hammer on screen. That's 1953's I, the Jury. After that, Biff and Betty lived in Hollywood permanently, with Biff working in movies and TV dramas. He starred in a host of war pictures, Between Heaven and Hell, The Enemy Below, Pork Chop Hill, and PT 109. His wife Betty died in 1974 at the age of 45. But Elliot married again in 1977 to Connie Bandy, and they were married for 35 years until Elliot died in 2012. Here's another fun note. Elliot's brother, Win Elliot, born Irvin Shallock. Win Elliot was an American television and radio sportscaster and game show host, known best for his long tenures as play-by-play broadcaster for the New York Rangers of the NHL and the New York Knicks of the NBA. He also hosted Sports Central USA on the CBS radio network. Good times. Our Perry this episode reveals Lieutenant Tragg's ineluctable logic about Perry and his clients. Try to follow this chain of reasoning.
Where is she, Perry?
Who?
Mrs. Prescott. She was seen in her house at 2:30 burning some letters with Mr. Prescott dead on the floor.
So it follows that I'd know her whereabouts.
Well, we find reason to believe that she'd find it desirable to consult an attorney.
There are thousands of attorneys in the city.
Ah, but only one Perry Mason.
Well, I don't think Tragg's logic actually scans, but he's right in his conclusion. There's only one Perry Mason, and even Berger is paying the dude an office visit in the final scene. Salute, Perry. You've got your opponent's respect. The theme for this episode is smarts. That's Harry Johnson's problem with the dead man Prescott, his murder victim. Prescott was always bragging about how smart he was.
Oh, he was so smart. He thought he knew all the answers.
We've heard that complaint before. See, for instance, the case of the runaway corpse, where Jason Beckmeyer bemoans the fact that his murder victim was always talking about how smart he was. Well, let's look at some of the other supposedly smart things people do in this episode. Or the riot act. People read others when they're not being smart. Early on, we see Prescott criticize Johnson for the way he handled that moving van.
Fool, you bungled it. Let's get him to a hospital.
We got Ruth Prescott making an error on what she does with the gun that she finds at the murder scene.
I had no right to assume that it was Jimmy's gun. When he told you that it was in his car, I didn't believe him.
There's Johnson reading Paul the Riot Act because Paul obviously hasn't driven a moving van before.
Well, I can see you've never driven the truck. All you have to do is use the gears and handbrake.
There's the really not smart Jimmy stay in my apartment routine. I've got a friend down the hall that Perry explicitly warned them not to do, and they do it anyway. And of course, Ruth gets arrested. There's Margaret Swain's easily traceable alias. I don't know what she thought she was getting away with, but Perry didn't have to struggle to find that information out. And let's not forget the dime store wit of our man Hamilton Berger. But alas, wit is not smarts. The best way to look dumb in this show is to think you're smart. Look at Della as a counterpoint in her explanation of the Miss Street monogram debacle.
MS.
Yeah, I guess I just wasn't thinking.
I just wasn't thinking is what more of these characters should be saying, not overestimating their own intelligence or taking pot shots at the lack of intelligence of other people. On that note, let's continue this discussion by hearing our Perry proverb. So we've discussed the important noontime adjournment in our visit to the law library. Perry uses the break as a chance to admit he may have made a mistake. This proverb's about humility.
Suppose we were wrong about all this from the beginning.
Suppose I told you that the greatest defense lawyer wasn't the one who never made mistakes, but the one who always admitted he made mistakes before it was too late to do better. Compare this with Berger's, I'm sure we would both rather forget the circumstances from the end of the episode. No, suppose you've been wrong about every case you've ever tried against Perry Mason that we've seen and still refuse to second guess your own certainty about his client's guilt. Let's grab a swig from the water cooler.
There is one thing I don't understand.
Go on, Paul.
Each episode in the water cooler, we begin by reviewing deleted scenes. You know, the comedic or serious scenes we would have liked to see in the episode that for whatever reason didn't make the final cut. Here we go. 8 deleted scenes from the case of the Lame Canary. 1, a montage of Prescott telling various people he's smart. Number 2, Ernest Ray telling clients that his business's good name is their biggest asset. Number 3, various crimes happening in front of the apartment clerk who can't be bothered to notice said crimes because he's reading Police Files magazine. Number 4, the police poring over Jimmy's letters to Ruth. Quote, I like the one where he compares her to a fine wine. That's just me extrapolating. I figure there's a lot of liquor comparisons in the letter, I'm guessing. Number 5, a scene of Jimmy staying the night with his friend down the hall. What was that like? Number 6, Jimmy tearing up the warrant from the police into smaller and smaller pieces of paper. Number 7, are we going to get a proposal from Jimmy? Are we going to get news of nuptials from Ruth? Where's that element in the final scene? All that for, I'm not sure. That's an actual serious question. I want to know what's going to go down with Ruth and Jimmy. Can those crazy kids make it? Number 8, what's happening with the business? I guess given the fraud going on at Prescott and Ray, Ruth will gladly take the $75,000 from the insurance and be glad she doesn't have to deal with the legal headache the firm's looking at. I know it's a $250,000 business, but it doesn't look like they're going to be doing business with anybody but the judicial system. Finally, let's take a look at our Paul prompt from the last episode, which involved Mexican divorce.
And are you saying my Mexican divorce is no good?
Well, that depends. If you followed the usual procedure mapped out several years ago by lawyers specializing in so-called Mexican divorces, it isn't worth the paper it's printed on.
Both my father, a.k.a. Dad Drake, and Aunt Myra were on top of it. My father wrote this: in response to the Paul prompt, I found this information on the web. Quote, in the mid-20th century, some Americans traveled to Mexico to obtain a Mexican divorce. A divorce in Mexico was easier, quicker, and less expensive than a divorce in most U.S. states, which then only allowed at-fault divorces, which required extensive proof and lengthy court review. Celebrities who obtained a Mexican divorce include Johnny Carson, Katharine Hepburn, Richard Burton, Elizabeth Taylor, and Marilyn Monroe. Mexico does not require spouses to be present at divorce hearing. They can send a lawyer to represent them. This fast-track process is in contrast to American divorce procedures, which involve additional bureaucracy and added expense. With the advent of no-fault divorces in the U.S., Mexican divorces are not as popular as they once were. My dad ends by saying the source also mentioned that Mexican divorces were plot twists in several episodes of the legal drama Barry Mason, to which my dad says, duh. Yes, gotta love it. As always, I'd love feedback about this particular episode of the podcast in general. Was there something about this episode you'd like to comment on or something you'd like to correct? You can email me at theperrypod@gmail.com. You'll find that address in the show notes. All PerryPod episodes are available via Spotify, YouTube, and iTunes. Thanks again for joining me on this pod journey. Join us next time as I give you a new kind of episode, a ranking of all 30 defendants from Season 2, worst to best. Not the best episodes, mind you, but I'm going to put Perry's actual clients in a list from worst to best. They're all there, from Ruth Whitaker to Ruth Prescott. Where will your favorite rank? Join me, won't you? Until then, this is Jonathan Searcy saying, keep on walking that Park Avenue Beach.